Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Slamtown. I'm Mike Ginn. That's Dan Bakley. Today we're coming together to do somewhat of a memorial. Unfortunately, the wrestling world lost a legend yesterday. The bad guy, Scott Hall, a.k.a. Razor Ramon, one of the founding members of NWO. Basically, the guy who started the Monday Night Wars. Scott Hall was a legend all the way back from the AWA all the way through to becoming a two-time WWE Hall of Famer. So we'll talk about his life, his legacy. Also do want to send a shout out, our deepest condolences to the Hart and Smith family, the Billington family. They lost their cousin, their niece, Tanya. So we do want to send our condolences to them as well. The wrestling world was definitely reeling yesterday from some losses. So our hearts, our prayers go out to all the families involved. Today, we wanted to take a moment, Dan and I, to kind of share some stories, take a look back at the career of Scott Hall. There's so much to unpack there, Dan. Right off the bat, anything you want to say about Scott Hall?
It's just tragic. It sucks. He was one of the guys that got me into wrestling. I just remember watching both Raw and Nitro back to back when I was growing up. It would always be like, I just 8 to 10. I'd always watch Raw, and then 10 to 12.
The Nitro replay.
Yeah, I would watch the Nitro replay. That was my junior high going into high school. I watched both of them until Nitro shut down, and then it was just Raw. Like all that was in the Scott Hall's time of shine, basically, from Razor Ramon going right into Scott Hall. I just loved it, and he was one of my favorite wrestlers during that time.
Yeah, him and Kevin, and mainly Scott, because Scott was first. Like, everybody remembers Scott Hall just showing up on WCW TV as an outsider. Like, he was, the whole story was he wasn't supposed to be there. Like, he works for the other company. He was using his real name. Scott and Kevin brought realism into wrestling. They kind of got rid of a lot of the gimmicks for a long time, because now all of a sudden it's not Razor Ramon, it's Scott Hall. It's not Diesel, it's Kevin Nash. And obviously some characters like Hulk Hogan and them kept their names, but a lot of the gimmicks kind of started going away for a while. It kind of led to a lot of really cool stuff, a really cool era in wrestling. I credit Scott Hall with starting the Monday Night Wars. Because his jump, he was first. They were waiting for Kevin's contract to finish up another month or two later. We all remember the infamous Madison Square Garden situation that left Triple H in the doghouse because Shawn was a star and him and Triple H were the only ones left. Sean Waltman kind of dipped out. Everybody left, and it was, Triple H was the one left in the doghouse.
But... Yeah, and what's crazy is that whole thing kind of ruined WCW, the whole curtain call, because it allowed them to, not on purpose, but accidentally create Stone Cold Steve Austin with that whole scenario.
There was a lot. There was a lot that kind of came, like the domino effect. But I'll go back even further, right? Somebody posted a picture yesterday of Curt Hennig and Scott Hall with the AWA tag team titles. And that's when I knew Scott Hall first. Like, so as a little kid, I used to go, like, ESPN used to have AWA on in the afternoon. It'd be like 4 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, or 6 o'clock at night, or sometimes. Like, it would just kind of vary. And I'd either watch it right after school, or when I'd go, like, my mom and I would go to eat at Chili's that was close to us at the time. And the bar would have it on, and I would just be like in the table, I'd be like, or my mom would just be like, don't go in the bar, but go stand next to it. You can watch it. Keep it so I can stay where I can see you. And I would just be enthralled. That's when I fell in love with Shawn Michaels, Scott Hall, Curt Hennig. All those were my favorites. And, back then, Scott Hall was a little different. Like, he was more of the bodybuilder, overly muscular, like, monster type character.
The mustache.
Yeah, he had the Americana 1980s mustache, the porn stash. And him and Curt Hennig were one of the greatest tag teams of all time. he just wasn't on a national stage, so a lot of people didn't know unless you watched that show. It obviously wasn't WWF at the time, so it was always like in the '80s, especially WWF kind of took over the world of wrestling.
Yeah.
So, if it wasn't Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and all that stuff, then you really didn't see it. So you really had to be a fan back then to like see this alternative brand that AWA was, even though AWA goes back so far with Vern Gagne and everything. But that was my first memories of Scott Hall, was this really big but athletic dude that just could, he was throwing people around, but he was really good in the ring. One thing people don't understand about Scott, Dan, was that he had a mind for the business. He was built in this business.
Yeah, he was one of the smartest guys around. Sean Waltman would talk about that all the time. He even put out tweets yesterday about how smart he was, and how he would even go out to say that he was smarter than everyone else in the clique combined, and he just had the knack for putting the match together, and just people wouldn't know that because he just wouldn't point it out there. He would just do it.
Yeah, I mean, he came up with the Hennings. He came up with the Gagnes. A lot of times those matches back in the day weren't so heavily scripted. They went on crowd flow. They went like, is the crowd with you, the crowd against you? What you doing? And you got to be able to change just like that. And Sean was around back then, but he was such a young green rookie. Like that's even before, like if you remember, like him and Marty went to WWF at the time for a second, got fired because they were so green and they were so young and they just wanted to party. Back then, Scott Hall was like at the hip with Curt Hennig. And we all know the business mind that Curt Hennig has with his dad, Larry the Axe Hennig. Obviously, his son made some time in the WWE. But when you come around all that, like you can't help but be in the business. And Scott took the business very seriously. A lot of people thought he was very jokingly and stuff like that. And he was. He was a lot of fun to be around. He obviously had his demons. He drank a lot and did a lot of partying.
Yeah.
But when it came to the business, Scott knew his shit. Like Scott knew what the hell he was doing all the time. Whether it's Kevin, Sean Waltman, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, all of them say the same thing. Like Scott was the brains of the operation a lot of the time. When it came to the whole outsiders thing, and Kevin Nash is very intelligent in the business too. Kevin Sullivan talks very highly of him all the time. They say a lot of the booking in WCW, which you can look back on it now 25 years later and say it was trash then too, but it really went to crap, and that's when led to WWE buying them when Kevin Nash wasn't booking and Vince Russo and all them took it back over. And that's when it kind of went like, when it wasn't one of the Kevins booking the show, either Sullivan or Nash, it went to crap. But even then, Kevin Nash would lean heavily on Scott Hall for a lot of stuff. Now, Scott was going through major demons at the time. Like he was in and out of rehab. He was unreliable to show up for events. So you remember the time in TNA where Samoa Joe cut a shoot/promo on him because he didn't show up for the event.
Yeah.
We can't sugarcoat it, right, Dan? Like Scott had his demons. But that's not what this is about. And Scott lived, for better or worse. Like he passed away in a lot of people's eyes way too soon. Obviously, he went in for a hip surgery, came out, had blood clots and complications, had 3 straight heart attacks, and the next thing you know, he's on life support, and then he's gone. But he was 63 years old, and he lived a lot longer than even he thought he would, and a lot longer than some of his peers.
And he was kind of able to recover from those alcohol problems, just the demons, which was kudos to DDP for giving him the help that he needed, and he started to grow back that light that he once had, and he was able to kind of get back in the good graces with everybody that he kind of pissed off over the years.
Yeah.
And then with everything, and it just sucks that this happened because of just stuff happening over time.
Yeah, like Kevin Nash said, though, he lost his best friend, and the wrestling industry lost an icon, a legend. But that's the memorial part of it. Let's share some stories. Let's do some fun stuff with and remember Scott the right way. Why don't you kick it off? Share like just one of your favorite Scott Hall stories.
Just one of the stories that I saw recently, and this isn't, I wouldn't say a funny, but just like it's been like videotaped and talked about on Twitter, was just the whole Matt Cardona, Zack Ryder, when he won the title in the ladder match at WrestleMania. They had chosen him to win the title, even though it was just going to be for one night. There was just that, like, you deserve this big moment, and he got the win. And he had pointed out that one of his favorite moments ever was when Scott Hall as Razor Ramon won at WrestleMania 10 against Shawn Michaels, and he wanted to be able to, and he was actually able to take a picture with them. Well, Scott Hall was backstage at that Mania, and he came over, and then Cardona was like, "Hey, can you take a picture with the title and then stand with me?" And he took a picture of him, and he was just giving him pointers about the match. He was just like, "Hey, great job! You did this, you did that. That was so great." I remember when I had my moment with the ladder match, and he was just in shock and awe. Just seeing a fellow wrestler do that shows how much of an impact that Scott Hall had on the industry, because this is like 15, 20 years later, and people still know who he is for that moment. That match is considered one of the best WrestleMania matches ever, and then the match for ladder matches that people look at when you think of that gimmick match. And that stood with me just watching that. I'm just like, wow, like this guy is having so much success on the indies right now, yet that's the moment that he chooses because of the impact that it had just on a lot of wrestlers' lives.
Yeah, Scott, especially after he got cleaned up with DDP.
Yeah.
A lot of people were able to make amends with him, like Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho and him famously feuded for a number of years, and I think it was 2020 he came on the Jericho Cruise and did a Talk Is Jericho episode, and they kind of squashed everything, and now they finished in a really good place, which is great because obviously he was able to make those amends before Scott passed. And Scott Hall made a lot of enemies during his time. He thought he was cool, the cool kid in class. It wasn't just a gimmick. It's kind of how he was. But he always took time to help people with their matches, especially the newer generation. You listen to people, even like Paige. He worked with a lot. Like he was always really cool with a lot of the women, Paige and Emma and all them. When the women's revolution was kind of starting in WWE. You talked about that ladder match with Shawn Michaels. One of the first televised ladder matches. A lot of people gave it credit for being the first. Obviously, Brett had a ladder match before that. And Stampede did ladder matches as well. But the first like major televised ladder match was him and Shawn. Of course, he's the bad guy. So what did he do? He came in and went under the ladder, which you're never supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then he walked away the winner. Like, he's one of the few, we talk about in basketball a lot, the Charles Barkleys, the Patrick Ewings, the Karl Malone, like these legends that never won a title. And are they still legends? And that's Scott Hall, right? Like Scott Hall never won a world title. But he was a multi-time like intercontinental tag title and everything else, right? But he made being bad being cool. Like I give him credit for the Attitude Era too, even though he wasn't there. Like that whole cheer Stone Cold when he's being a bad guy, cheer The Rock when he's being a bad guy. That's Scott Hall.
Yeah, he was even the inspiration for Team Bad when the Divas came out, and then you had Sasha Banks paired with Naomi.
Tamina.
That was the inspiration was Scott Hall. There's a picture floating out there with him right after they did it, and he was there, and he took a picture with
yesterday.
them.
But like he's supposed to be the bad guy. He's supposed to get booed, but then he'd be coming out and he'd be like, "Hey yo," and all of a sudden the crowd would pop. It's survey time. Crowd would pop. No matter what he said the survey was, no matter how ridiculous it was.
Another win for the good guys.
Another win for the good guys. Crowd could be throwing trash all at him and everything.
Yeah.
He just stayed like true to like his stick, and he was like, "You're not gonna knock me off my stick, so you might as well just cheer me," because it like at first like they're also the ones that kind of like brought back like the 70s fandom, right?
Yeah.
Like in the 70s when you had heat, like they tried to kill you. Like the fans hated you. Like the fans were like, and you carried that kayfabe all the way through wherever you went. Like Jerry Lawler would tell stories about whenever he turned on somebody, like he had to look out for somebody trying to stab him in the parking lot. When Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came in as NWO and started the NWO, and they were invading, people were throwing trash. When Hulk Hogan came down and he turned bad, then the whole ring was filled with trash. And then for weeks after that, all like every time they come out, toilet paper, cans, all kinds of stuff, which was incredibly dangerous for the wrestlers. But they brought back what was called true heat. Like they really got the crowd mad. And then they were able to take that, bottle it up, and turn it into being cool.
Yeah.
And then everybody was rocking an NWO shirt. Everybody was like saying the catchphrases. Everybody was staying up late to see what they would do. You fast forward it, they even were able to kind of like, I thought when they were going to bring the NWO to WWE after like a couple years and they brought in Hogan and Hall and Nash.
Yeah.
I was like, this is going to be stupid because they're trying to recreate something that's already going through its cycle. Like by the time NWO was done in WCW, it was done. Like they literally had almost the entire roster a member of the NWO in some form or faction. And they got to bring it back, and they actually, that just shows the credit of the performers.
Yeah. You had the Rock versus Hulk Hogan. You had Scott Hall versus Stone Cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you basically, and it helps that they were paired up with some of those stars too, but you had Hogan basically reinvent Hulkamania. And that was a totally organic moment at WrestleMania and the night after with the Canadian crowd who just, you know, they were ready. They were ready to cheer him again. And a shout out to JBL, Briscoe, and Kevin Sullivan. They did an interview on JBL and Briscoe's show, kind of talking about that whole initial turn of Hulk Hogan to being a bad guy, how long it took him. And also kind of killed a lot of rumors too. A lot of people thought, oh, if Hogan doesn't do it, Sting will do it. It was never Sting. It was always 100% Hogan. In fact, he made Hogan sleep at his house the night before. Hogan's agent slept at Kevin Sullivan's house the night before in a different room just because he was trying to talk him out of turning bad, and Kevin Sullivan didn't want him anywhere near Hogan. He's like, no, I've been working on this for years. You're not going to take this from me. So it was always Hogan, just to clarify that BS. Yeah. But you fast forward, and then that also organically made Hall and Nash into these monster heels again, you know, and a lot of the reactions that they've all gotten throughout the years have been organic. It hasn't been manufactured through some storyline through WCW or WWE. These are guys that have gotten themselves over. Like, you know, like Scott Hall got Scott Hall over. When he gets put in a macho machismo Razor Ramon gimmick that should have been dead on arrival, you know, like this fake Tony Montana, just like
I'm hanging out in Cuba.
Yeah, like it was like half Cuban, half like Italian Guido. Like it was supposed to be like a joke. Like you know, Vince McMahon put Dusty Rhodes and polka dots. Like anybody that was kind of like Scott Hall was one of his chief rivals in AWA. He finally came over to WWE or WWF at the time. You know, it was supposed to be a joke. And what did Scott Hall do with that gimmick? He made it one of the most epic gimmicks of all time.
And he was kind of even able to kind of change it up over time too. And people just forgot about that because they they liked him, the wrestler. They didn't really care about Razor Ramon the gimmick. It was just like they're enamored by his personality, how he wrestled, the quintessential Joe Cool.
I mean, his straight up charisma.
Yeah.
It was straight up charisma. Like, and a lot of the mannerisms he did then, he still did towards the end of his career. You know, the whole smooth in, all that stuff he's done. And he made other people do it. Like, now everybody does the stuff that he did. You see Damian Priest doing the Razor's Edge. You see,
he's a perfect example of like a mixture between Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He wears like the Kevin Nash gear, but then he does the Razor's Edge. He does that, and then he does like the little just gestures, because he had come out and said that was his favorite tag team. He loved them and he wanted to honor them. He even asked them if they cared that he would do all that stuff, and they were like, "Go ahead, you got our back."
Yeah, and you see Brian Cage doing like the toss like that. It's just, everybody has paid tribute to Scott Hall in some way, some shape, some form. The guy is a legend, and that's a word that gets thrown out way too much when we're talking about wrestling, but he is truly a legend. He started in this business very young, and he outlasted a lot of people. Look, we talked about it. Scott's had his demons. He's been in and out of rehab a million times. Medical problems left and right due to all the alcoholism throughout his years. He told Kevin Nash famously, there's not going to be an afterlife for me. And I'll leave it up to people at home what they believe, but I think there's definitely an afterlife for someone like Scott Hall, because while he had his demons on earth, you'll find it very hard pressed to somebody saying something bad about him right now.
Yeah.
And that goes to some of his worst enemies. Goldberg said something nice about him. Chris Jericho said something nice about him, because in his later years, he made peace with a lot of people. And you can thank DDP for it. He did it with Jake Roberts. He's doing it now with Buff Bagwell.
Yeah.
And who knows? Who knows if it'll stick with Buff, because he seems a little different. He doesn't seem like he's ready for it the way Jake and Scott were. But one of my favorite stories, I'll go back in time a little bit for you. Even before the whole New York City Madison Square Garden thing, you had Razor Ramon kind of getting buried after the whole 1-2-3 Kid thing, right?
Yeah.
Like 1-2-3 Kid did the major upset. And here's another thing about Scott Hall, to get sidetracked for a second. He put everyone over. It was his idea to have the Kid beat him. That's how Scott Hall was one of the biggest stars on the roster back on Monday Night Raw. And he said, I think it would be really cool for this kid to beat me. And Vince was like, this scrawny little kid going to beat one of the biggest giants I have on the roster? And Scott Hall's like, yeah, nobody would expect it.
No.
And this is a kid who just like 2 weeks ago was wrestling in Global Championship Wrestling on ESPN. Like he was nobody. But he was just a scrawny kid from Minnesota that he really could go in the ring. And all the wrestlers respected kid, Sean Waltman, because they knew he could go. But that wasn't a time when WWF pushed small wrestlers. Shawn Michaels had to fight and scratch and claw for that. Bret Hart had to scratch and claw for that. And even them, you call them small, but both Shawn and Bret were about 6'1", 6'2", and probably at the time, maybe like 230 or 250, 240, because they had to bulk up a little bit to please Vince. And that was also the steroid era. Whether they did or didn't, they had to compete. We talked about the Dynamite Kid effect. Like everybody smaller had to compete. But he put the Kid over. Like that's always one of my favorite stories, to lead to all the whole click thing, right? Like they took a small, nobody, scrawny kid, Sean Waltman, and brought them under their wing. That not only then carried into the NWO with Six Pac, He would, of course, famously go back to WWE as X-Pac.
Yep.
And then later, when they all came back together, came back to NWO with everything, but still as X-Pac.
Yeah.
Like, Sean Waltman wouldn't have a career.
And he's still wrestling now for GCW.
Yeah, he just made a comeback after all the years off with his medical problems.
Yep.
But Scott Waltman wouldn't have a career if Scott Hall didn't put him over.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of my favorite moments, like, before all that. Like, Scott Hall put everyone over.
And then after that match, I think it was like a year or two later, Bret Hart put him over. And Bret Hart said that Scott Hall made the right move years ago, putting him over to begin with. And then he wanted to do it as well. He wanted to continue that because he knew that they all knew by then that Sean Waltman could carry a match and could work with anybody, and not just one person, but anybody in the ring.
Yeah, 100%. And if you fast forward, the Outsiders, right, when they went to WCW, who was doing most of the in-ring work? It was Scott Hall. Like, Scott Hall was an incredible worker. And Kevin Nash, who at that point his knees were bad, his back was bad. You saw when he went back to WWE, he instantly like ruptured his quad like multiple times. Like Kevin Nash's body was worn down by that point. And Scott Hall was the worker. And Scott Hall would go in. He would be the instigator. He would start the storyline. Kevin Nash would come in for the hot tag. Scott Hall would take the beating. Scott Hall would come out and do everything.
He sold like a champ.
One of the best ever. And you can look at the bad moments, right? Like, you can look at the stupid storyline of how they ended Goldberg's undefeated streak with the cattle prod, right?
Yeah.
You can look at, just some of the stupid side stick stuff he would do just because he would throw it out on a wall to see if it stuck. Or he was just feeling like being a dick that day. Like, as fans at home, we never noticed. That was what made Scott Hall great.
Yeah.
We just knew he was really cool. Dan, I'll give you the last word on Scott Hall before we get out of here. Any final thoughts on the man, the legacy, what he leaves behind?
I think he just leaves behind just that character, just the confidence that as a wrestler, you could do anything if you just believe that you are that guy, you are that confident. He was one of the first that made you believe that.
One of the first people to be himself and turn it up 1,000%.
Exactly, because just like they said, that was who he was in real life. Just turned up a lot, and he just made it happen. Even through all the shit that he was going through early in his career to later when it got even worse. He kind of knew how to just put that beside him and then just make sure once he's in the ring, he's in the ring. He's doing a job. And he was able to just phase everything out. And then everybody had stories. I remember the story that he was just putting on about The Undertaker, how nobody knew about The Undertaker. And he'd be like, everybody always goes to party after matches, after shows, pay-per-views. And he said, I knew The Undertaker in AWA when he had no tattoos, no long hair, no nothing. He was just Mark Calloway, and he was a cool cat. Like, we would go party right after a show, and he'd just be sitting there with his drink and just be chilling right there while everybody be going buck crazy. It was like I'm the one who came up with calling him Big Smooth, and that was his nickname that I gave him, and it just stuck with him. Like, I had a relationship with a lot of people, and you just wouldn't know because I was loyal to everybody close to me. That of course, the clique.
Yeah,
and that was just
which obviously led to the Bullet Club.
Yeah,
and half the other people in the world throwing up the click sign. You can thank Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Sean Waltman, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H for that, and everything that's happened since then because of that.
You could just watch all of his matches, just watch all the documentaries. You learn a lot about being a wrestler, just watching Scott Hall be himself, because he had a big impact on the business, and there's no disputing that he was just that good, and it just sucks that he got taken too soon.
I'll say another thing. You know, you always give Bret Hart credit for never hurting somebody in the ring, right?
Yeah.
Scott Hall did a lot of power moves in the ring.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anybody getting hurt because of Scott Hall. Not a single person. Not from the Razor's Edge, where he threw you basically on the back of your neck.
Yeah.
Not from the fallaway slam, where he just basically tossed you. Like, everything he did was with purpose. Yeah, I think everything you said was perfect. I think Scott's going to be missed. Our thoughts and prayers, obviously, with his family, his friends, his loved ones. Not just the people that we know on TV, the clique. Obviously, Kevin was very close to him. Sean Waltman was very close to him.
Yep.
Shawn Michaels and Triple H, both have chimed in saying they lost their brother. But he had a family. He had loved ones that we never saw on TV. He had people like Larry Zbyszko, who he was like rooming up with, people like DDP and Jake Roberts. And, there's a lot of people we don't even know, right? Like that he just touched their lives that we'll never know. Because I even had somebody I used to work with put on my Facebook page, because Scott Hall was originally from Southern Maryland. He was a military brat, basically lived in a different town every year until he was like 15. But he still went back for like lacrosse games and other things in Southern Maryland. So like the person I know, like, saw him in high school, like at high school games and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those are stories that you will never see in the news. Scott Hall was much more. He lived 63 years, which is way more than some of us will ever live. Which is amazing with all the demons and stuff that he made it that far. But yet we still feel like something was stolen from us with him leaving now. And that's the kind of impact he left. He could have lived to 102. He could have been like Betty White, like knocking on the door of 100 and passed away. We still would have felt like, man, we wanted one more year out of Scott Hall. We wanted 10 more years out of Scott Hall. And it's the same impact. Make sure you guys leave a comment. Share your Scott Hall stories with us. I'm not doing any promotion this episode. I want this to be about Scott Hall. You can tune into our social media for all the promotion. But leave a comment. Let us know. Share some stories you have with Scott Hall. Let's remember the bad guy together. Any final thoughts, Dan?
This one's for the bad guy.
Like Scott Hall said, bad times don't last. Bad guys do. And this bad guy is going to live forever in our hearts and minds and souls. So this is Slamtown, the memorial edition for Scott Hall. We'll be back with some more cool topics soon as Dan and I can get a schedule going. Yep. But rest assured, Slamtown will be back with some new episodes soon. We thank you for watching. I'm Mike Ginn. That's I'm not going to call him Heel Kate now. That's Dan Bakley. And we'll see you next time. We're out.